What is your take on Education 4.0 and the needs of the educators?
I really don't like those phrases like Education Web 4.0. I mean, I don't even know if we're at Web 3.0, are we? Because really what's helpful is to think about learning and to think about how we can make that, can best deliver that effectively online. So a big part of it is how we train students to become more autonomous.
I also have another reading of digital learning is like how we learn, and that's the methodological part. What we offer through this Web 2.0 and what we offer through this interactive type of teaching and learning.
The augmented reality is becoming part of education. Gamification becomes part of the educational tools.
I have 5-6 roles. I'm a teacher, I'm a facilitator. I have to be an expert in digital technology. I have to be an expert in digital methodology. And I have to be a motivator. And I think that was the hardest part in the last 2 months.
I think if we're really thinking about the way that education has embraced digital technology, then we probably do need to look more towards the impact of the internet.
I think computer literacy needs to be embedded in any and every type of education.
Welcome everybody to this webinar on digital education, online assessments, and the new role of educators in the 21st century. Fascinating topic, very relevant. So hopefully we will have a nice discussion today. So my name is Craig Johnson. I am the co-founder of Gile. Before I essentially dive into the topic and introduce our speakers, I will just cover a bit of practical things quickly, just to frame the discussion so you know what to expect over the next 60 minutes. We're essentially going to split up the conversation into 3 segments, as is consistent with the title of the webinar, right? So we're going to first talk about digital education and sort of conceptualize that. We'll then shift the conversation to talk about online assessments and what is a fair way to grade students with distance learning, for example. And then finally, we'll end off with the new role, right, of teachers and educators in the 21st century. So that's more or less what's going to happen. You guys know the drill. There's a chat box at the bottom. We're going to launch a poll in the next second. Please do answer the questions because we want to get a sense of the audience and who has joined us here today. So I think it's time to introduce our speakers. I'll begin with Dr. Andrea Tick. She's a professor at Óbuda University in Hungary and a member of our editorial board at Gile Journal. Andrea has over 26 years experience in higher education, and she regularly conducts research in e-learnings and digital learnings, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. She's developed courses, published books, research papers, and she also has a background in computer science, maths, and English. So Andrea, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Another speaker is Russell Stannard, which I believe many of you already know. He's an educational director and associate trainer at Norwich Institute for Language Education. So Russell has won many awards as an educational technologist, and he's also the founder of Teacher Trainer Videos. He's received many awards from British Council, Times Higher, and the University of Westminster for his work in ICT and that with regards to its use in education. And I think with over 35,000 subscribers, Russell, I think it's fair to say that you are fairly dominating the airwaves in some shape or form. Russell, welcome.
Hi, lovely to see everybody online. Great.
And then our last speaker is Dr. János Förstös. He's a professor at the Computer Information Systems and Business Intelligence Department at the Metropolitan State University of Denver. If you're wondering where that is in the United States of America. So János has also published many books and research papers related to the computing field. And he has been involved with various roles related to learning management systems, cybersecurity, and all these sorts of things. So János, I think it's about 10 a.m. there. Welcome.
Great to have you guys around here. Greetings from the great state of Colorado.
So yes, just to quickly comment on the poll before we essentially delve in, it seems like 50% of our respondents, so we've got about 60 so far that have joined, 50% come from Europe. We've got 20% in Asia, 16% Middle East, and almost 10% in Africa. It seems like the demographics, if I can use that word, we've got mainly educators here, and 80% to 83%, and then students and researcher as well. What I will do is I will share those results so you can see them. And I think we can begin with you, Russell. Digital education actually has been around for a while. We've always had transparencies back in the day, and then the projector. That is a form of technology in the classroom. And, the word is really bandied around quite a bit. What comes to mind firstly when you hear the words digital education? And then following that, what would you say are the latest trends and developments with regards to the likes of e-learnings?
Well, I mean, as you said, you're using the word digital, so I guess that's the starting point, really, in terms of understanding, the technologies that we're talking about when sort of digital technologies were introduced. So we can go back quite a while, but I think if we're really thinking about the way that education has embraced digital technology, then we probably do need to look more towards the impact of the internet. I mean, there are definitely instances before. I mean, content on the CD-ROM is in digital form, for example. We've even had before that, using discs, etc. Then even go back further than that. But really, I think if you was to look at a major point, it would be the internet. And then I think another major point within that would be what we might call Web 2.0. So I think that was a big changing point in terms of the delivery of teaching and learning online, because once we got Web 2.0, it allowed us, which was sort of 2006, 2007 period, that allowed us then to begin to upload a lot of content onto the internet, to have things like Moodle, to have YouTube, where Facebook comes out, all these kind of Web 2.0 technologies. So when we look, the history of digital technology and digital delivery, it just simply depends. It's got various starting points. I mean, I've actually been involved quite a lot with the Open University, and if you was to go back to sort of distance learning, then going right back to the 1960s, you can go back even,
Yes.
As far as where we are now, I mean, I think we're in a very interesting point. I think one thing that we're definitely going to see over at the moment is a real proliferation of new tools coming onto the market. I'm sure Janos will probably have something to say about that. But from what I gather in the background, already companies are really trying to power up. So even, if you look at, say, Microsoft Teams, and you realize that they're going to be introducing breakout rooms, and they're going to be introducing, and there's going to be new technologies coming into the market. So there's going to be a lot of new tools being introduced. So that's going to be one really big thing that's going to happen, I think, in the next few months, over the next few years. I think my concern within that is trying to make sure that we embrace them effectively.
Right. Yes, I mean, Andrea, you do a lot of research with the most up-to-date methodologies when it comes to e-learnings and digital learnings. What is your take on where we are now and where we are heading?
Yes, thank you very much. I do agree with Russell that it's the digital technology that keeps us moving ahead, but I think it could be like an umbrella term as well for all kinds of e-learning systems and all kinds of applications that we use. But I also have another reading of digital learning is like how we learn, and that's the methodological part. What we offer through this Web 2.0 and what we offer through this interactive type of teaching and learning, like how long the videos are, how long the webinars are. And that's, I think, the other side of the digital learning, which is not a technological part, but it's rather the behavior, and it's rather the educators' responsibility, what they develop and how they deliver all this, because this COVID, this pandemic is really a good chance for us, what is digital learning. I think I do not agree with the COVID. I think it's a bad thing for globalization and for the world. But as for educators and for digital learning, it's a good opportunity to see how these tools work and how it can go ahead. And if you think of the open access for these tools, because immediately Prezi, Teams, Zoom, Gantt, Teams, all these companies and all these software tools became open for educators to help them to deliver the material. So I think from a methodological part, the lecturers have the responsibility how they deliver the learning material to the student.
Yes. Janusz, you've heard a lot about what Russell and Andrea said, and so how we deliver it. Is it the same with you there in the United States? And then maybe you can also talk about curriculum when it comes to what we deliver, because a lot of people are pushing for computer science and stuff in the computer field to be standard items on the curriculum and syllabus, regardless of the field of study. What is your take on that as well?
So it is true that there are a lot of developments going on right now in the technical field. Zoom, as widespread it is, very soon researchers discovered that it had some serious security issues. So they are working on that. That was a push coming from the community to fix it. The Teams had that shortage that you could only see 4 video feeds at once on the screen. Last month, they extended it to a 3x3 video matrix. And yesterday, they just announced that later this month, they will come out with a 7x7 setup. And they are also pushing it to further. So what we see right now, all those needs have been amplified by the user needs, user requests. What I also see, looking a little bit forward, as Russell, called me on that, going to like Web 3.0, meaning augmented reality is becoming part of education. Gamification of certain tools becomes part of the educational tools. It looks like teaching, learning becomes kind of a commodity. So if you are interested in a topic, you go to Google, start to search it, and there's a very, very high chance that you will find something on YouTube addressing that topic. It was funny the other day, my daughter was joking because unfortunately she had to replace the engine in her car. And they went into the workshop or the shop, and they told her, hey, this is how much time it takes and this is how much it will cost. And then she called me and said, Dad, I can do it. I said, what do you mean you can do a engine replacement? She's a lawyer. So how can you do a engine replacement? And she said, hey, I just Google it and then we'll watch the YouTube video and I can replace the engine. I said, maybe not. So there are topics, areas where we can really find a lot of materials online. The question is how good they are and how the structure is, whether it really meets all those requirements, what we as educators supposed to build into our materials.
Yes, no, thanks for that, Janusz. Russell, we've heard about needs being amplified, and in the comments section here with the chat, someone was talking about education 4.0. You do a lot of videos for teacher trainings. What is your take on education 4.0 and the needs of the educators when it comes to using all these digital tools such as Zoom, Moodle, all of those?
I really don't like those phrases like education web 4.0. I mean, I don't even know if we're at web 0.30, are we? And I hear that a lot also when I get people tell me about Gen Y and Gen X. I'll tell you something, just sort of picking up on those, on the points there. I think, the point that Andrea's brought up about the importance of these technologies being used effectively by teachers. So part of it is the opportunities, the tools that we've got available, and then part of it is the way that we actually use those. And one of the things that I definitely feel at the moment that still really that is somewhere right in the middle. In other words, yes, you need technological skills, but yes, you need methodological skills. And when I run courses that are quite long, and I only do teacher training, then actually I often go right back to the basics. Okay, how do you believe learning takes place? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. So if we can really think about how people learn and what's an effective way of helping people to learn better, that is a great starting point. And that's why I really agree with Andrea's point that so all these layers of, you know, Web 3.0, Web 4.0, they're not really helpful in a way, because really what's helpful is to think about learning and to think about how we can make that, can best deliver that effectively online. And I think one point that I would add to that, to build on the points that both Jana and Andrea has made, is that for me, one big issue is, so it's the technology, yes, it's the teachers and their methodology, their approach. And I think it's also a big part of it is how we train students to become more autonomous. I'm seeing that a lot. In other words, the more I can empower my students to be effective about the way they access digital or content generally, because as Andrea said, it's much wider than just technology, but simply them becoming more effective learners. I think that's going to be more and more important, because it may be that with all the content that's around and all the possibilities that are now available to us, our part really is to support our students and to help them to be more effective learners, because in reality the content is out there, the materials are out there if we can help them to become more effective.
Yes. I want to just take a moment to inform everybody to please also continue sharing your questions as we go along. Some of you might have slipped into the webinar a little bit later, but in case you did, we've been talking about digital education as the first sort of segment for this discussion. And we're going to cover online assessments subsequently, and then the role of educators. So we've just heard from Russell now about how to make students become more autonomous. And Janusz a moment ago mentioned about people, we're in a YouTube culture, right? So people can just Google for tutorials and figure that out. So now we see that sort of shifting in the online environment. But what seems to be slightly problematic, if I can use that word loosely, is how do you assess students when it comes to delivering content online? And I think that's a nice segue into the next section that we can talk about, because it seems to me that you would need some sort of continuous assessment mechanism, some sort of feedback loop, and some sort of collaborative learning online. Andrea, maybe you can come in here, because I know you design many of these courses, and you also track lots of user behaviors and online behaviors. So what is your take?
Thank you very much. I think I would like to add just some points to Russell, that I think we have to be very attentive to our students and learn. It's like a two-directional way of learning how technology is used, and it can be related to assessment as well, because I think if we look at ourselves, usually we are not from the same generation as our students are. So they in a way have other technical skills that we do have. That's why if we understand, and we can ask them also to help us with some of the apps and some of the tools, and if we understand how they use them and how they are trained and skilled with these tools like the smartphone and all these apps on the phones, then the way we develop the courses will be better for them. And the gamification that Janusz also mentioned, which is I think a key word for them. I tried quite a lot of tools with these students, and the games, flashcards, memory games, simulations work the best, because they just wanted to do it again and again and again. And if we just send them the material like in a tunnel, that won't work. And that's the same with the assessment. If we try to assess them, it can be a formative, or it can be also a summative assessment in a course. Formative can also be like in-course assessment for the students, which could be just a practice test, that they see how well they could progress with the learning material and how much they can gain on these multiple choice quizzes, for example. Or we can also give them a collaborative test that they can do together. So they can share the work, okay? And then when they do the test, then it will turn out who is better in which skills. Definitely there should be a feedback in these cases, otherwise this will not work. But we are not just, we cannot talk about just multiple choice questions, single choice questions, because it's just one way of assessing students. When we have even virtual classes, we have to see the students and we have to talk to them as well. And in some cases, assessment can go through these virtual classes as well, not just through learning management systems. That's what I think.
Yes, yes. Janusz, you deal a lot with learning management systems, and is it the same regardless? Because you in the computer science field, so it's not really content specific, but more how you deliver it. What is your take on online assessments in general on your end?
It's really, really hard to do it in just a one size fits all manner, especially especially in the US. When we are talking about students, we are talking about a lot of different people. I have students in my classroom who are just fresh from high school. I have students in my classroom who are at the beginning of their career and they just want to add something to their skills. I have students in my classroom who are in their early 40s who are getting ready for a career change. And I also have students in my classroom who are retired grandmas coming back to the university because they want to learn something. So when we are talking about a student, that's a very, 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 very colorful palette what we see regarding how prepared they are to use technology in an online environment, what kind of tools they have regarding technology, computers, phones, tablets, bandwidth, which is a big issue in that environment. So when we are talking about learning management systems, we have to consider all of those. How we deliver, in what format do we deliver those materials? Online chats, video conferencing. You need bandwidth, you need technology. Are we talking about text files? Are we talking about PDF files? Are we talking about high-end, MP4 files, which are just huge, even just to download? So those learning management systems can do that. They can deliver, but it's still on us, on educators, how we design those materials and have to, sit down with that famous six-pack and do some thinking. How we want to do that, considering who is in our classroom and what kind of materials we want to provide them.
Yes. You used an interesting trigger word there, which you mentioned bandwidth. And I've seen lots of teachers getting inventive and delivering material on WhatsApp, for example. We actually got a question here from one of the people in one of our attendees. And maybe it's a nice sort of connection to what you're talking about now. So the question is, what teaching and learning tools would you recommend for African educational institutions where internet coverage is not comprehensive? So in other words, there's no bandwidth. So
there was a very, very interesting conversation what we had at a conference, and that was especially related to Africa. It was about women, how we can help them to get independent and put them into a business area. I'm teaching in a college of business, and certainly there was a huge brainstorming, and brilliant minds came together, setting up websites and payment systems and stuff like that. And at the end, one of the participants who initiated that question said, "Guys, sorry, we do not have electricity all the time in the village." So how do you implement all those brilliant ideas when the underlying layers are missing? So it is a very, 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 very valid question, and we had to deal with some similar issues in Australia. So how do you communicate in areas where there is nothing? I mean nothing, just sand. And they figured it out how they can put down phone booths which are powered by sun panels, and basically establish communication to those areas. So what we need to do is really look at technology again, and see how technology can provide, and technology can already provide. Then certainly the next question is, who will finance that? So bandwidth is not cheap. Bandwidth is not cheap. Certainly the technology solutions are there. So we have cables, thousands of miles of cables in the ground, on the bottom of the ocean. So if there is somebody who is willing to finance it, or we can find the resources, we can create opportunities. But bandwidth really is a financial question.
Right. Do you want to comment there, Andrea?
Yeah, just 1 minute, that we don't have to go to Africa or Australia. It's said that bandwidth is unlimited, but even during the lockdown in Hungary, there were some regions in Hungary where there was problem to reach elementary school children, primary school children, because of the bandwidth, because of the lack of internet, because of the lack of technology and devices. I know that we're talking about higher education, but even with higher education students, we had some emails saying that please help us, we have some problems. So the universities try to solve all these problems, and I'm quite sure that also the primary schools try to solve all these problems. But if technology is missing, then an emergency remote teaching cannot be solved immediately. So you need time. You need time for that as well.
Yes. Actually, before I bring you in, Russell, I would like to go back to the online learning and the assessments. I'm actually curious as to how many of you have completed an online course, and what's your take on gamification. So I've just launched another poll. So if you can just spare a minute just to answer that. But let's to go right back to the online assessments, Russell. There's also a lot of concern globally about dealing with students copying online, where they are required to complete an assessment, but they've got multiple tabs or browsers open and they're just Googling answers, and there's a Control-C, Control-V happening. What is your take there? How does that process get managed within dealing with online assessments?
Oh, I mean, obviously that is a problem. It requires, I guess, a variety of different, as someone said before, it's not one type fits all. It's about a variety of different assessments. It's about formative assessment, summative assessment. One of my personal interests has been in the area of e-portfolios. So that is because really I like the idea that students are working through a course with me and adding up examples of the things that they produce. I think Andrea touched on something where we embed the assessment into the teaching and learning. So when I'm running my teacher training courses, my teachers, as they're working through and doing different things with me, the things that they produce, they actually put them into their e-portfolio, and then they have to reflect on them. Okay, which brings up another thing about sort of when we're talking about sort of helping our students to become more independent. So I've been very interested in the idea of e-portfolios. They don't have to be, they're not all the same. There can be different types of e-portfolio, but I very much like this idea of kind of ongoing assessment. And I very much like the idea of building up a repository of examples of the types of content that you've built during the course. So I'm doing quite a lot of consultancy work with various universities where people are looking into that. And perhaps from my own personal experience has been the thing that I've found the most interesting as a way of combating some of these problems, because it's interesting as well when students are writing up their reflections. So obviously that's not something that's easy to copy and paste. They're writing about their own experience of learning in the classroom and what they've learned from a discussion or a debate they've had or some content that they've put up onto the internet. And I think also the other nice thing about an e-portfolio is that it also gets, especially through the questions that you provide, where normally an e-portfolio has two parts: the evidence of the learning and then reflecting on that learning. And those questions that you put up in the reflections that get them to think about, well, what did they do and what did they learn from it and how could they apply it in the future or to their own situation. Those are really interesting types of questions that get them to think about what they're doing and obviously improve them as learners. So that's certainly one thing that I've focused quite a lot of my attention into.
Yes, I want to just stick with you just for a little bit longer, because you mentioned e-portfolios, but there's also things like breakout rooms. And I know you also do some stuff with flipped classrooms, but online. Can you maybe just chat about that a bit?
Well, I think that also comes back to the point Andrea was making, because the flipped classroom in terms of delivering online learning is very powerful, because what we really want to do is to relate what the students are doing online, right, in the live session with you, to what they might have done so for example, they might have accessed some content on Moodle, watched the video, taken some notes, and then when they come into the Zoom session, you can immediately get them working into breakout rooms and doing activities based on the material that they were working on at home. So you're linking what we call the synchronous and the asynchronous parts together. So, but the e-portfolios fits into that really, really well, because see, when you do an e-portfolio, if you do a collaborative activity together, let's say you build a Google Doc or you build a Google slide together collaboratively in your breakout rooms, or even as part of a synchronous lesson, you can then all take a copy of that and put that into your e-portfolio. So you might have 4 people in the group, but everyone can take a copy and put it in as evidence of their learning. So that's one of the reasons why. And the lovely thing about that is that the assessment is embedded into the learning. You don't have to do specific activities that are kind of separate from the delivery of the teaching and learning. No, the two things are linked together.
Right. You want to add to that, Andrea?
Yes, I think we can integrate also. I mean, what I think with these flipped classrooms that really works is the problem-based type of learning and a project-based learning, which could be actually just one-to-one shifted to the virtual classroom as well. It's not just the personal face-to-face teaching that where problem-based learning could go. And I think for the assessment as well, you can use this problem-based type of assessment. And it's very similar to the e-portfolio. But in this case, you do not ask back actually the theoretical part, just what they can apply, and they have to prove, what they learned from the theoretical part. Or you can also ask practical questions. I mean, when you use natural sciences like mathematics, I know it's easier because you give them tasks that they have to solve. They have calculations that they have to do, and then they cannot copy anything. But even with other natural sciences, you can ask such practical questions that they cannot copy, they cannot Google it. They have to think and they have to apply what they studied. So what I tried also is this problem-based type of assessment and mini project that more students work together. And another assessment which kept away the type of copying is a secure exam environment that you can use another camera, but it's again a question of technology, whether they can use another camera from the background to see the screen or the monitors that the students use, because we never know whether they have 1 or 2 or 3 screens on their desk.
Right.
So technologically, that's and methodologically, that's what we can do, I think.
Right. Now, thanks, both Russell and Andrea. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the results from the last poll so you can have a look at what I'm seeing. So it seems that most of you have had some experience with online courses, most likely self-paced. There's quite a few that we've even done more than 10. So yes, at least I would say 70-80% of you have done online courses. And it seems that the majority of you also take the view that gamification is an appropriate means to deliver content to at least university students. because I know not everybody agrees in the public, but it seems that you guys are fans of that, because why not? Learning can be made fun. So I think at this stage, just to take stock of where we're at, we spoke about digital education. We then move the conversation to online assessments, how to deliver content, how to keep track of continuous learning using things like e-portfolios. And I think now we can sort of shift to the last segment, which is the new role of educators in the 21st century. So that is basically the behavioral changes. Of course, to put a disclaimer there, it's not just the educators that need to change their ways, but obviously students as well. Okay, so we do know that. But in terms of what makes a 21st century educator, Janusz, can you maybe begin? We can begin with you.
Certainly. I just received a research paper 2 days ago, what the independent higher education research group published. And certainly they were reflecting on the recent news and recent changes in higher education regarding how the classroom and how the whole education system has changed. They interviewed students regarding how they like the changes and how they like the education online. And some comments were really, really eye-opening. Students reported, and I'm quoting one, 3 out of 4 of my professors had never taught in an online setting. Okay, so what we see right now regarding the changes and development in online education, I feel most of it is coming from the need of the change, not because we want to change and want to switch to online. Which also means that some professors, some teachers are not ready to work in this online environment. So, and most of the cases, the technology is the big barrier. We feel very, very comfortable to stand up in front of 20, 40, 60 students in the classroom, but we don't always know what to do, what to expect in a online environment. You know, right before the seminar, we talked a little bit with Andrea, and you know, she asked me whether I miss my students in this online environment. Yes, I do. And you know, when students are coming to my online class, many of them do not turn on the camera. Some of them do not even have a camera. So I have no idea who is on the other end of the wire, and I'm sitting there, you know, cat on my lap, and I'm lecturing and try to involve them into the whole teaching learning process. And in many cases, I do not feel at the end that I really, really succeeded. So we have to retool ourselves, not just in assessment, not just in technology, but also in that behavior area, how we, you know, after passing 50 or 60 years of age, can change and have to change to adjust ourselves to this new environment.
Yes, Russell, do you agree? I imagine it's very similar there out in the UK, and you are very close to teachers because teacher training is your bread and butter, so to speak. So you would be very close to knowing what their concerns are and how they've struggled during the transition into this so-called emergency remote teaching. What's your view on that transition for them, and what is it they struggle with, and where do they need to be?
I do think, yeah, I mean, the majority of teachers, obviously, a lot of teachers not young, so a lot of teachers were kind of schooled in a more traditional way of delivering teaching and learning. I can see it at the moment. So all the people I'm dealing with, 4 or 5 different organizations where I'm doing training, you know, a lot of teachers do really struggle. I have to say, a lot of the teachers, though, behind it, they have thought about teaching and learning. They have thought about how learning takes place, but they might not have the knowledge of the technologies that are available for them to facilitate what they would like to achieve. So often when I meet up with teachers and I meet them online and they say, Russell, you know, I've got to deliver my course online. I might be talking at a university, and they've got ideas about what they want to achieve and what they really want their students doing, that they want them working on projects and that they want them working in groups, but they simply don't have knowledge of the technologies. And that's why I say there's a really intricate base between those two things. So, you know, we are at a stage at the moment, and we are at a stage where we've always got to get this balancing act between these two things: knowledge of the technology and knowledge of the pedagogy. And that link to the pedagogy, though, has to always be really, the pedagogy has to be about what we understand about the way that people learn. So, for example, I work in the specialized area of, you know, language teaching. That's my thing. And often when I'm doing teacher training with teachers and I see them and you know, they'll deliver in a class, and it might be a really interesting class in terms of, on the surface of it, there seems to be a certain dynamic about the lesson, and they introduce some technology into it, either blended or online. But when I sit down with them afterwards and say, well, why did you do this? Or why did you do that? How was that facilitating learning? How was that supporting your students and going to help them? Sometimes there's not enough thought into that. And I do honestly think that we need to continually go back to the point, how do people learn? And how are we going to effectively deliver that in the 21st century?
Yes, Andre, I think you also, you personally experienced it, right, at your university, where you needed to make the change. But is it fair to say you were at a relatively advantageous position because of your closeness to technology as a whole and computer science and dealing with all these digital tools? Was it easy for you personally? And then maybe you can comment also about your colleagues when it came to them adapting to this new role.
I have been thinking about this because I had the chance to be an English teacher when I started teaching, because that was one of my degrees. So like 20 years ago, I was a teacher. Who am I now? I have 5-6 roles because I'm a teacher, I'm a facilitator. I have to be an expert in digital technology. I have to be an expert in digital methodology. And I have to be a motivator. And I think that was the hardest part in the last 2 months, to motivate my students to be with me, to do the work, to be online, to have the camera on, to ask questions, okay? And it's not just to do the task. So I think as a lecturer, let's say, we have several roles, and sometimes you have to be the mother because they have problems, personal problems, so they have to help them as well. What happened with this digital technology, my personal experience, it was quite easy for me because I was trained as well in digital technology and in ICT, but I had colleagues who had real problems how to start this emergency remote teaching and use all the digital technologies. So what we did, we actually had courses, mini courses. When they had questions, 5-6 questions, immediately got together, tried to solve it, tried to help them. How to deliver the material, how to develop, let's say, courses, because that was also a problem, because if you're not used to having digital courses, then that's also a problem, because when you design, when you create, then you have different roles. You need a graphic designer, you need an IT person, you should know what the methodology you want to use, what type of tasks you would like to use. So I think quite a lot of models we have to take on when we teach online or when you use the digital technology. But thanks God, quite a lot of apps helped us, and the learning management system also helped us a lot.
Yes, and don't forget Russell's own teacher training videos. That's also helping everybody quite a lot. Yes, I think we'll just pause a little bit to answer some of these Q&As. So the quick one, which I can pose to the entire panel, is what are the ethical issues, challenges, or concerns underlying the application of digital education? So perhaps maybe we can start with you, Janusz, then Russell and Andrea.
There are huge issues right here. Probably we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about assessment and cheating and all that stuff. But when we had students participating in online education and they had to use their camera, some of them expressed concerns about their privacy. Because right now we are in our home office, you know. Certainly you can change your background to whatever you want, or have that, you know, green curtain behind you as Russell does, or, you know, show family pictures. But some of them are really concerned since we have seen so much trouble with the online presence and privacy and similar issues. Technology is a very interesting, especially the digital technology or computers or network or cloud or, you know, whatever, you know, tools or words you mentioned related to that. Because in many cases, this, you know, technology development is being compared with that experience what people may have had at that time when the cars were introduced. And it's, you know, such a you know, fundamental issue. We can bridge distance and time to time we can even bridge time. But I think the internet and this type of digital technology is very different, because your car will not steal your identity. Your car will not break into your bank account. So we have much bigger and much more serious issues with the internet, and some people don't really care, or they do not understand what's happening, what's going on, but others really express serious concerns, and they say, hey, I do not want to do that. I do not want to install certain applications, certain programs. I do not want anybody allowed to poke around on my computer. I do not want to turn on the camera in my home. So there are serious issues what we need to address. Companies like Zoom and Microsoft providing Teams and learning management system developers certainly already recognize that, and their legal department puts out documents regarding, hey, this is what we do and this is how we protect your privacy and identity. But time to time, beyond those statements, it turns out that the technology is not really doing that. So then the question becomes, who takes responsibility? Who is liable for that? And what happens in that sense? Is that the university, because we are using that platform? Is that the developer who did not plug in that security hole? Is that the teacher, professor who selected to use that tool in the classroom? You know, who is liable? And then what can we do about that harm that potentially these solutions can cause? What will happen in the courtroom? And I don't have the answer. So I, you know, talked about that with my daughter, and she said, you know, Dad, I put up my hand, stand to the wall, shoot me. I don't know. So we are very early in this whole, you know, internet, online teaching era. And we did not work out all those problems, potential problems. And I don't think that we even know all those potential problems that the use of this technology can potentially cause.
Yes. No, I mean, I understand what you're saying. And for the most part, regulation or a policy has always lagged behind technology. And there's always been that delay in figuring things out and how it's going to work, whether it's with ethics or whatever relating to digital education. For me, I see the difference is that it's become ever more urgent, and the delay has even more consequences. I mean, I don't know how you see ethics in digital education, Russell. Maybe you can comment it from your side.
Well, we certainly, I mean, some of the companies that I'm working with at the moment, let's just take an example, you know, they're in, say, perhaps in the delivery of health education. So, you know, the ethical problems now of, let's say, if you're in a small room having a discussion about maybe a particular client or particular patients, or you're talking of, let's say, you know, you're teaching in the area of politics and then you're having a debate in a classroom and that's private and there are people from various countries around the world, well, that stays within those walls. It can be quite risky if you suddenly have that same discussion online, can't it? Yeah. So there's real issues now around the types of how we transfer a lot of the types of teaching and learning that would normally take place within the four walls of a university environment, perhaps in a seminar or something like that, to now trying to replicate those sorts of things online. In fact, I was involved today in a big discussion about this because particularly people working in healthcare, in the area of politics, childcare, all those, you know, all those sorts of areas, there's real problems with what can we and can't we do on the airwaves, because obviously things can easily be recorded. People can more easily, for example, hack into a system. I mean, there are always, even you could argue that there are dangers even if you're in a small room having a debate with someone in a seminar, but they're a lot less. So yeah, there are lots of issues to think about.
Yes, I see. I've acknowledged that we've got about 9 minutes or so. I think as a last question before we can begin the wrap up, it's from Zeba Zaidi. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I think it touches on the first two segments that we spoke about. So there was a question if you agree that a lot more work and training is required for educators globally with regards to implement augmented learning environment and to especially gain better control over the assessment, monitoring, and conditioning the learners to adapt to the new methods. Perhaps, Andre, you can start to comment on that, and then we'll go to János.
I think yes. We need. Sorry, I have to see it again. I think it puts a lot more work on us, and we have to be trained because if you think of the design of augmented learning environment, we need to be trained and skilled, and it needs again time. What about assessment monitoring? I think I can repeat myself that somehow to create a safe environment, and I think I can mention now that we have to differentiate between the universities and other online courses like MOOC courses or Coursera courses, because those are open access courses, while universities try to keep their online learning in a more private environment, so it doesn't go always online or in a way that everybody else can join. So the secure assessment environment is a vital problem, but it's also a financial and technological problem. I think that's my comment on that.
Okay. Do you agree, János?
Yes, and even more. So with this online education, we have to keep in mind that not everything can be taught online. So even if we wish, how do you teach wall climbing in an online environment? Or how do you teach welding in an online environment? Or how do you teach like cooking, culinary arts in a hospitality management program, how to chop, onions in an online environment? So how you hold a knife and all that stuff. So we have to realize that technology still has limitations. Certainly that move or that potential path providing us with augmented reality tools can help, but we are not at that point that I have a little device here and all of a sudden a 3D holographic image jumps out and then shows me what the message is, like in a Star Wars movie. Okay, so we have to live with that fact that we have still limitations when it comes to technology. The question is, how can we somehow turn that disadvantage to our advantage and maybe figure out some ways to address those issues and or encourage developers to provide us with tools in that area. For the instructors, teachers, certainly this is a starting point for a lifelong technical learning. You asked that question earlier, and I just realized that I did not address that. But yes, I think computer literacy needs to be embedded in any and every type of education. It's just the reality that you cannot even check out at the groceries being involved or touching 4, 5, 6 services and servers in the background. And all you did is you just brought your broccolis, okay? But you have to use technology because the scale is connected to a computer, your credit card reader is connected to a computer, everything is connected to a computer. If you go into like a medical facility in hospitals, are how much they spend on the bedside of a patient, what do they do, where are the rare equipments distributed in the department so nurses can easily find them. So, technology is really, 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 really everywhere. Marketing guys, you want to interrupt?
No, I'm just, you can wrap up.
Yeah, so what I want to say, we have to learn and we have to embrace the idea that even as educators, we have to learn.
Totally agree.
Yes, no, for sure. Limitations, computer literacy being embedded, fantastic. Any closing remarks there from yourself, Russell? Then we'll turn to Andrea.
Yeah, it's a lovely point that he's just made there. And, just to sort of add to that is that, I know that this is a real challenge for a lot of teachers. We get confronted with these tools, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Microsoft Teams, whether it's Moodle, whether it's Blackboard, whether it's Canva, all these technologies. I've actually sometimes sat on the other side and worked with these companies that are developing these tools. And often they're not thinking them through enough. They're not consulting enough with teachers when they're actually developing these tools. And some companies are, so I'm not going to accuse everyone of this, but some companies are not. There is a tendency when these platforms and these technologies are being developed to always go, well, we can do this, we can do that. And they get added to, and they become very cumbersome and difficult to work with. We pass them over to teachers, and then teachers struggle to make use of them. We've really got to appreciate and understand when we're developing these technologies that in the end, they're going to be in the hands of a teacher, and we've got to make them as usable and as easy to learn as possible. And some tools are not developed in that way.
Yeah. Any closing remarks there, Andrea? We've had a lot of good nuggets here from these guys.
I think to sum it up, we can say that technology and this online teaching and digital learning is not the almighty way to do it. So I think we still need the blended learning way of teaching. We still need some personal contact with the students. Like I saw a remark that how are we going to teach PE through online? And actually I had experience with some PE teachers that they were really struggling with it. So we cannot say that this is the exclusive way. What we can do to use as much as we can and to learn as much as we can, the lifelong learning and getting more skilled in ICT and technology, and going back to the computer literacy. And just right from the very, very early age, we have to teach children so they will not have any problems by the time they are in higher education. And they will be really skilled in computer literacy. It's not just digital natives, they're using the apps, but actually critical thinking that they have about the technology as well.
Yes. No, fantastic. And as we got 1 minute to the hour mark, I think I'll just wrap up here. You've heard a very interesting discussion, just to give you a rundown. We spoke about digital education and that it's not just about the technology, but how you deliver it, right? So the pedagogy. Spoke about asynchronous learning, things like online flipped classrooms, gamification. And then we also recognize the fact that technology has its limitations, and when it comes to a content perspective, the need for computer literacy. right? We then looked at another segment altogether, which was online assessments. We recognized the need for continuous assessment, problem-based assessment in a secured learning environment. And then the last sort of section looked at the new role of educators. That is to say, what makes a 21st century teacher? We know that they have to wear multiple hats, right? They're the motivators, they're the tech experts, and then they're also delivering the actual lesson. So they need to be able to facilitate learning. They need to also want change. They need to understand what makes people learn, as Russell pointed out. And it's important that we involve students as well in the lesson. I know that sometimes it can be a bit disheartening when you don't see cameras and you don't know who's at the back of the screen. And if you are making the impact that, you live your life day to day to do. So yes, I think like everyone needs to retool themselves. I think it is a fantastic of views and opinions, and I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Andrea, Russell, and Janusz. It's been a pleasure to have you all on board.
Thank you very much.
Guys.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Very nice.
And thank you all the participants. I recognize that you're coming from all over the globe. It's absolutely fantastic. We will post this in case you have some friends who have missed the conversation. It will be on YouTube in a week or so. Please do visit our webpage for future webinars. Visit teacher trainings. Lots of fantastic content being pushed out there. And then, yes, I hope we will meet again. Thank you, everybody, and have a pleasant day.
Thank you, Craig.
Cheers, guys. That was a real pleasure. Thank you very much. A really interesting discussion.